May 15th, 1940. The French are launching counterattacks all over, trying to contain the German bridgeheads on the Muse. At Sedan and Flavion, French tanks score successes against German panzers. But throughout it all, confusion and lethargy reign supreme within the French command. Little by little, the Germans outmaneuver and outpace their opponents. German breakout is close at hand. I'm Indy Neidell, and welcome to our World War II miniseries 10 Days in Sedan, where we cover the German thrust through the Ardennes, the rage of the Reich, and the new confrontation between old enemies at Sedan, the crucible where the fate of the Axis and Allies converge. Join me as we explore the course of the battle and its aftermath. As dawn breaks today over Sedan, the German Grossdeutschland Infantry Regiment, backed by the 10th Panzer Division, starts pushing south. They know full well that their numbers aren't sufficient to hold Sedan against a determined French counterattack. But maybe they can prevent a counterattack from ever happening by keeping their foes on the back foot. They encounter elements of 21st Corps Commander Jean Flavigny's 3rd Armored and 3rd Motorized Divisions at the village of Stonne, on the northern tip of a clump of high ground which overlooks the path to Sedan. This is regarded as a prime staging point for any counterattack, so taking it could really throw a wrench into French preparations. Speaking of that counterattack, is Flavigny finally getting his act together? Well, his boss, 2nd Army Commander Charles Huntziger, gets a call this morning from his boss, Commander of the Northeast Front Alphonse Georges, and he tells Huntziger to get it done as soon as possible before things in the sector get even worse. Huntziger phones through a mission imperative, an express order to Flavigny, telling him he must attack and do so immediately. Flavigny gets this order about 8:30 a.m., but it's not until 10 that he's able to get the commanders of his 2 divisions together to talk about this. He tells them to start concentrating their forces at the center of the front. Yes, the forces that he split up to take defensive positions about 18 hours ago, and schedules a full counterattack for 2 in the afternoon. There are some problems with getting this done. Since the divisions have only just split up, a lot of pockets of troops and tanks are unaccounted for and haven't reported in from their new positions yet. A lot of them can't report either, since loads of their radios have malfunctioned or broken during the rush to get these guys to the front lines, and they've had no time to get them operational again. The bigger problem, though, is that even by the time Flavigny gets the order from Huntziger, the French defenders have been dislodged from Stonne and is now occupied by German troops from the Grossdeutschland Regiment. So the French don't have their forces ready, and now they don't even have a staging point. Stonne must be retaken. Flavigny begins attacking with small clumps of his forces as they become available to him, and they do manage to retake it successfully. Then the Germans counterattack and they retake it. And then the French counterattack and retake it once more. That's 4 successful assaults, 2 apiece, and by the way, this all happens in the space of less than 3 hours. The French are having success here, partly because the units now engaged are much higher quality than the ones encountered so far by the Germans in general. But they've also been able to deploy their armored behemoth, the Char B1 Bis. For once, the French were able to mount some combined arms attacks using tanks, infantry, and artillery, which inflicted serious losses on the 10th Panzer Division and the Grossdeutschland Regiment. In particular, the German infantry were shocked to see that their 3.7 centimeter Pack anti-tank gun had great difficulty penetrating the thick armor on the Char B1 Bis tanks at Stonne and got to experience tank panic for themselves. The B1 tanks perform exceptionally well, and the crews even start to believe themselves invulnerable to the German guns. This myth is dispelled when 3 are knocked out in quick succession shortly after 11 a.m., and other crews who witness this panic and drive off. Still, it's a very good tank at this stage of the war, and it's going to be a key asset moving forward in what's turning out to be a slugging match. And here's the thing, you might be thinking, oh, well, the French are doing a lot better here. Maybe there's some hope for them after all. But I am going to have to bring you back to reality now. All of this plays into German hands. Remember, Flavigny's orders are to organize one big counterattack, not get drawn into a scrap for one solitary village. But this is exactly what he's doing. The German plan has worked. By keeping the French constantly engaged, they're preventing an attack that would actually overwhelm them from materializing. Flavigny commits more and more fresh troops to Stonne piecemeal, rather than having them gather in the rear areas, and that means inevitable delays. He postpones the big attack by 2 hours at first, now meant to be happening at 4 in the afternoon, then delays it again until 6:30. We have seen this before. He did the same thing yesterday, and it has the same result too. At 6:15, he again cancels the attack plans for the day. Actually, 2 companies of the 49th Tank Battalion, who never receive word that the counterattack has been cancelled, advance on their own at 6:30. They encounter German troops around Artes, just south of Chemery, and actually do pretty well, even without support. German anti-tank guns start pounding the B-1 tanks, but once again, find them really hard to penetrate, especially at medium range. The tank companies quickly realize that they're the only ones attacking, though, and turn around, heading back to their start positions. The German defenders are left relieved, but mostly confused as to why the French tanks, which had shrugged off their guns like they were nothing, and could have very easily driven them back, chose to seemingly randomly go home. Needless to say, the past 2 days have been a comedy of errors on the French side, and it's about to get worse. Second Army Commander Charles Huntziger has been watching the fighting around Stonne with growing apprehension. He's quite exasperated by Flavion bungling the counterattack once again, but he's wondering what the Germans are trying to accomplish by attacking south towards Stonne. Huntziger's own dated thinking here really does come into play because, oh boy, Huntziger likes a good fort, and the French have a lot of them on the border with Germany. He seems here to misinterpret the fight at Stonne as the main German thrust, and disregards reports of the 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions pushing west, thinking those are either exploratory or diversionary. He's thinking the Germans are trying to push southeast towards Verdun after getting across the Muse, isolating French fortifications on the Franco-German border. So he believes that at all costs he must prevent the panzers from moving south and east, while 19th Panzer Corps Commander Heinz Guderian is only thinking about moving west and north. You see the problem, right? Also today, Gotthard Heinrizi's 7th Army Corps arrives near the Cher River to the east, making him even more sure that the objective is to cleave France in two from north to south. It is in this context that Huntziger suddenly decides to radically alter his lines, having most of his army pull back to a line running from Attigny to Innor. This involves pulling some of his best troops away from their fortifications to defend this deeper line, including the 3rd North African Division, who had been holding the Mouzon sector southeast of Sedan. The pivotal point here was fort number 505 at La Ferté. That meant that all the many fortifications in the Mouzon sector, in whose favor the Sedan sector had been neglected, now fell into enemy hands without a fight. More than 130 pillboxes had to be abandoned. Without any action on the part of the Germans, the breakthrough point at Sedan, that had formed only a 6-kilometer wide bottleneck, now opened like a breach in a dam to a width of almost 30 kilometers. The western route was already pretty open to Guderian's forces, but now Huntziger has thrown out a welcome mat for them. Believe me, we're going to talk a lot more about Charles Huntziger in the coming days, and whether or not he ought to be shot. He should be, by the way. But plenty of that is going to come as well in the long-format documentary on this all that we're also preparing. So don't think for a second that this is the last time you will hear of this retreat order. There are retreats elsewhere today. Let's head north and check in with how Hermann Hoth's 15th Panzer Corps are doing with their Muse crossings. When we left the story, the French were preparing to launch a big armored counterattack. We saw how the French 1st Armored Division moved up to their assembly area near Flavion last night in preparation for launching a strike against Erwin Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. The attack should have gone ahead yesterday evening, but the tanks took an age to arrive, by which point they were running low on fuel. In the end, they halted and waited for refueling this morning. Traveling 23 miles overnight along bomb-blasted and refugee-clogged roads, 3 battalions of Bruneau's tanks arrived at the assembly area. Because of the excruciatingly slow pace, the 65 Char B1 bis and 40 Hotchkiss H-39 tanks used all their fuel and had to await their Bowsers before attacking. Unknown to both sides, the French and German armored forces spent the night just 5 kilometers from each other, with Rommel's 25th Panzer Regiment camped out in the Morville area. In the morning, Rommel's tanks make their move and head for Philippeville. Here, there is a brief engagement between the 25th Panzer Regiment and 2 battalions of the French Armored Division. But Rommel actually has no interest in battle here, and his tank regiment instead keeps to the south of the enemy and continues pushing west to Philippeville. Instead, it is Rommel's sister division, the 5th Panzer Division under Max von Hartlieb, that ends up engaging the French as he heads across to the north of Flavion. More specifically, it's the 31st Panzer Regiment under Paul Hermann Werner that leads the engagement. The Germans are in a bit of a tricky position here, as they are outnumbered by the French. The French also have more Char B1s. The 31st Panzer Regiment had 2 panzer battalions, whereas Bruno's 1st Armored Division had 4. The difference becomes even more striking if one looks at the precise number of models suitable for tank action. On the French side, there were around 90 Hotchkiss 39s, 65 of the feared Char Bs, and at least 12 Renault 35 tanks of the 6th Independent Tank Battalion. That meant the French had just about 170 battle tanks, of which some had already been destroyed during the prior action against Rommel's panzers. Werner, on the other hand, had a total of 30 Panzer IIIs and IVs. The remaining 90 German battle tanks were the lightweight Panzer I and II models and could not be used to engage enemy battle tanks because of their inadequate armament. The first clashes are a bit of a shock for the German panzer troops. The commander of a Panzer III reports that his rounds simply bounce off the thick armor of a Char B like marbles. In the end, though, it is the Germans, outnumbered and under-armored, who emerge victorious. But why is this? Well, one major factor is that every German tank has a reliable radio set, whereas most of the French sets have broken down because of their weak batteries. Werner is able to easily give orders to his units, and the platoons and companies are able to cooperate and support each other. On the other hand, the French tanks end up fighting fragmented and uncoordinated battles. Individual French tanks end up being picked off by groups of German tanks. This is especially important when it comes to the Char Bs, and we see wolf packs of Germans surrounding the heavy French vehicles. If they can't kill the tank outright, the panzer men concentrate on smashing the enemy's tracks and immobilizing him. The Germans are also fighting a real combined arms battle. Werner uses his lighter tanks to bait the French into driving into 88mm flak guns. His artillery is far enough forward that it can provide very accurate support, and Stukas are on hand for air support. Finally, many of the French Char B heavy tanks simply end up running out of gas, and several of them are set on fire by their own crews. The Battle of Flavion is a true disaster for the French 1st Armored Division. By the time Bruno gives the order to retreat in the evening, his division has basically been wiped out. Of his initial force of about 170 tanks, only 36 remain operational. While the crews have fought with real bravery, they have, once again, been let down by their commanders, logistical failures, and an army that is stuck firmly in the past. But for all the drama, the battle at Flavion is kind of a sideshow. Like I said earlier, while von Hartlieb's 5th Panzer Division is doing the fighting here, the lead elements of Rommel's 7th Panzer Division are making a rapid push to Philippeville. This prompts the French to think about a withdrawal west to another defensive line. Already, General Martin has ordered his 11th Corps to fall back and take up a defensive line south of Florennes. He places the newly arrived 4th North African Division and the remains of 18th and 22nd Infantry Divisions into blocking positions on the road to Philippeville. But this is too little too late, and Rommel's panzers brush aside this new obstacle and reach their objective by midday, before driving almost another 10 kilometers west. Higher up in the French command, even more dramatic withdrawal orders are also sabotaged by Rommel's advance. 9th Army Commander André Korap orders his forces to withdraw to the west about 25 kilometers to prepare defensive positions along the Franco-Belgian border. Korap's superior and commander of the 1st Army Group, Gaston Bilot, agreed in principle, but instead ordered that the whole army group should withdraw a slightly smaller distance to a defensive line running from Charleroi in Belgium to Rethel in France. Between them, Martin, Korap, and Bilot proposed 3 different defensive lines. With communications broken and movement difficult, this plunges the divisions along the line into chaos. Plus, With Rommel already having advanced well beyond Philippeville, German panzers are already behind Billott's proposed line. Ninth Army is in the process of unraveling, so Commander-in-Chief Northeast Front Alphonse Georges makes some changes. First, in order to get a better grip on coordinating the defense, he removes the 2nd and 9th Armies from Billott's 1st Army Group and takes direct control of them. Then, on Billott's advice, he sacks Korapp as commander of the 9th Army and replaces him with Henri Giraud. They believe that Giraud will inject some vigor into things. But Giraud soon sees for himself how bad things are. Arriving at Vervins late that afternoon, Giraud received situation briefings and afterwards, at 8:30, reported to the GQG, the 18th and 22nd Divisions are completely disorganized. The 61st Division has abandoned Rocroi. I have ordered General Martin to take charge of the defense line within our frontiers. My impression is grave. Further south at Montcornet, Georg Hans Reinhardt decides he won't be outdone by Rommel. He's been held up for a while, but now he gets his breakout. Last time, we saw that Werner Kempf's 6th Panzer Division went nowhere yesterday, meaning that Panzer Corps Reinhardt was running behind schedule. The holdup here is caused by the French 42nd Colonial Infantry Regiment fighting well and holding very defensible positions on a narrow peninsula. The Germans are also struggling to get their forces up to the front line, with many units still stuck in the Ardennes traffic jam. We also saw that this prompted Army Group A to try and restrict Panzer Group Kleist's operational freedom, calling an end to the experiment with independent panzer forces. Commander-in-Chief Gerd von Rundstedt ordered that the Panzer Group was to be placed under command of the 12th Army as of noon today. These orders are particularly galling for Panzer Corps Reinhardt. See, by now, some of the infantry units have caught up and are trying to make their own attempts at crossing the Muse. One of these is the 3rd Infantry Division, part of 3rd Army Corps, who are crossing at Nouzonville. They've managed to get a foothold across the river, but they are being held up by the 52nd Colonial Machine Gun Regiment. Early in the morning today, 12th Army orders that Reinhardt's Corps will be withdrawn from the front and will only play a supporting role to those infantry units. Panzer Corps Reinhardt was to be taken out of the front line and assigned to the operational reserve. Only the 6th Panzer Division was to be left in the front line, although it was to be placed under 3rd Corps. The latter's divisions were now to accomplish the mission that the 6th Panzer Division, very deficient in infantry, apparently could not. Kleist's reaction is basically just to ignore the orders of his superiors. He urges his corps commanders to press home their attacks. Reinhardt orders Werner Kempf to break through the positions occupied by the French troops. The men of the 6th Panzer Division need little encouragement. When they learn that they are to be hauled from the line and replaced by a lowly infantry division, they set to their task with renewed vigor. At 5 a.m., they launch their attack on the blocking position, equipped with flamethrowers and preceded by a massive artillery barrage. Kempf actually has a stroke of luck here because the force he's attacking is already following the order to withdraw further west. At Montcornet, the 42nd Colonial Machine Gun Regiment dutifully evacuated most of its fortifications. By 8:30 in the morning, the reserve lines and rearguard were overrun with the unit commander captured. A pontoon bridge was quickly thrown across the Muse, and soon Panzer Regiment 11 broke out into open country. Getting across the river allows Kempf and Reinhardt to prove the value of the Panzer Group Kleist experiment and preserve their operational independence. Kempf ignores orders to send elements of his division to help the 3rd Infantry Division. Instead, he decides to exploit his breakthrough as quickly as possible and drive his division deep into the enemy's positions. If he can do this, he thinks, he will present his superiors with a fait accompli, and well, they will just have to let him carry on. Kempf doesn't have all his forces across the river, so he puts together an ad hoc force called Pursuit Detachment von Esbeck, named for its commanding officer. This brings together a panzer battalion, some motorcycle troops, engineers, artillery, and anti-tank troops. In theory, units of the new French 6th Army should be in place to oppose this new drive. And yes, there are some forces there, but they really aren't able to put up much of a fight. On paper, at least, General Touchon has deployed the 2nd Armored Division under Albert Boucher. But deployed is probably quite a generous word for the state in which this division finds itself. In reality, the individual battalions and tank companies have been torn apart as they have moved to the front. For starters, Boucher has received multiple sets of operational orders in just a few days. His units have been told to act as a reserve for the fighting in Belgium, to join the counterattack at Dinant, to wait on standby, and now to join 6th Army. Then the tanks were moved up by rail, but the wheeled vehicles were moved up along the roads, resulting in an inevitable loss of cohesion. As Kemp's pursuit detachment rushes forward into this confused melee, it manages to destroy several of the division's supply columns, which have been left unguarded, and destroys some of the French tanks while they are in the process of deploying. Without much in the way of armored opposition, Kemp's units are basically advancing into a vacuum. The vehicles earmarked for this unit were given preference in crossing the river over the pontoon bridge. By 3 p.m., the pursuit detachment was complete and pushed west with lightning speed. By around 8 p.m., attacking relentlessly, it had reached Montcornet, which was 55 kilometers away as the crow flies. Indescribable scenes took place on the way there. Again and again, the Germans simply rolled all over the French columns. In most cases, there were not even any noteworthy combat actions. Rather, the French, who did not expect any enemy formations that far to the rear, acted as if paralyzed. On several occasions, the dust-covered German vehicle columns were confused with French or British columns and were greeted with friendly waves before the French realized their terrible mistake. More than 2,000 enemy soldiers were taken prisoner, although the Germans had hardly any time as they rushed on ahead. By pushing through to Montcornet, Kempf has rendered the French defense plan totally moot. Not only has Rommel penetrated beyond the line in Belgium, but Kempf has pushed even further west. That means that French 6th Army Commander Touchon has to content himself with sealing off the southern side of the German flank along the Aisne. His exploits also mean that Group Kleist's operational independence is secured. From the viewpoint of von Kleist, the most important result of the push to Montcornet was that Kempf had saved the establishment of the Panzer Group. Because of this unexpected success, the commander of Army Group A reversed a portion of its rather restrictive orders. That meant, above all, that the Panzer Corps Reinhardt again came under the command of the Panzer Group Kleist. Of course, the Panzer Group continued to be subordinated to 12th Army, but that had no further effect for the time being. Instead, Panzer Group Kleist was now again given permission to attack far ahead of the 12th Army's infantry divisions. And that is where I will leave things today, with Rommel, Reinhardt, Guderian driving forward into acres of space vacated by the French. Things are truly desperate for the French now. I will leave you with some words spoken by French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud to his British counterpart Winston Churchill during a phone call that he made in the early hours of this morning. Here is how Churchill tells it. He spoke in English and evidently under stress. "We have been defeated." As I did not immediately respond, he said again, "We are beaten. We have lost the battle." I said, "Surely it can't have happened so soon," but he replied, "The front is broken near Sedan. They are pouring through in great numbers with tanks and armored cars," or words to that effect. "We are defeated. We have lost the battle. I said I was willing to come over and have a talk." Churchill heads over to Paris and arrives in the French capital tomorrow. Although he's initially more confident than his French opposite number, the British Prime Minister soon realizes the situation is really as bad as Reynaud makes it out to be. Next time, we'll see where things go from here. You might have guessed, but it's not going to be in any direction that's favorable to the French. Do not forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss that thrilling episode. Our Time Ghost Army Ardennes Amigo of the week is Ross Hartshorn. Amigos like Ross ensure that we can do what we do best and bring you coverage like this. So make sure to join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. See you next time.